Our last presenter today, and again, just a reminder, the actual presentation of the awards to these very worthy, at least in my mind, recipients will be this afternoon over in the old Galileo Hall. But our last recipient today, our last presenter this morning, Charles Lemme, class of '66. He's made significant contributions in the areas of medical devices, the automotive industry, and the optics industry, and has more than 40 patents. So, Charles, Chuck.
Well, first I want to thank the Alumni Committee for this award. It was totally unexpected, but it's greatly appreciated. The letter that I received announcing my selection stated that the award was largely for innovations that had led to patents from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. So I thought I would say a few words about innovation, which has been sort of the center of my career. What it is, why innovation is important, what it's based on, and how it can be taught. So even though the concept of innovation is fuzzy, and it has its murky concept is argued continuously by patent attorneys, a common sense definition of innovation from Merriam-Webster is that it's the introduction of something new, or a new idea, a new method, or a device. But the Patent Office requires more than just being new. To be granted a patent, the concept also must be novel, which is defined in the negative. That is, it's not resembling something that's formally known or used. Another requirement is that it's also defined from the negative is that the idea must be non-obvious. The last requirement is much easier to meet usually, in that it must be useful. So we have a fuzzy idea of what innovation is, but why do we bother with it so much? Why do we want to have innovation? Why can't we just proceed with what we have? Well, innovation is the main, brings about progress. It's mainly in making things more efficient use of resources such as human effort and material for a given output. It brings about faster output, better QC, better health, longer lifespan. Innovation is the basis of growth here for our economy. So on what is innovation based? How can we promote it? To innovate requires a community, with each generation standing on the shoulders of their predecessors, seeing a bit further than developing a body of knowledge that grows with each innovation. And this stacking of one generation on the other is fractal in nature, and it builds on the giants at the beginning of science, such as Newton, who is credited with developing this concept of standing on the shoulders. And it continues from the original giants down to us who continue to innovate. We all stand on the shoulders of the prior generations, learning from our elders and communicating with our peers. So I'd like to mention some of the shoulders on which I stood. I had many mentors along the way, many folk who helped me and took interest in me. But improbably, the most influential person was not someone from a technical field at all. He was chairman here of the Humanities Department, Dr. Warren Davenport, since deceased, but he was the one who taught me to write succinctly and using only minimal number of words to convey the idea that we were trying to get across. After doing poorly in the first semester of his English class, he saw a diamond in the rough and called me into his office and tutored me one-on-one for the whole second semester. He really taught me how to write, and without that, that's the most important thing that I got out of especially out of my freshman year, maybe out of Harvey at all, because being able to communicate is so important. That is probably the most important thing, besides the technical areas that I got out of Harvey Mudd. For teaching me the technical fundamentals, I have to thank a whole group of Harvey Mudd professors, starting with Dr. Sedat Serengekti, who taught me physics as a freshman and systems as a junior. I'll never forget the aha moment that I had on spring break of my freshman year when I was walking along on a road near home and water was running in the gutter. It had just rained. The leaves were blowing in the wind. Cars were accelerating beside me, and I had this aha moment that I understand that. This is F equals ma. The leaves are moving because there's a force on them, and it was from the discussions that we had with Sedat that this aha moment came about. I have to thank Dr. Harry Williams. He taught me thermo and strength of materials. And then when I signed up for his elasticity class in my senior year, I was the only one who signed up. So instead of just canceling the class, which would have been his prerogative, he said, just come into my office. And so he tutored me in elasticity that semester. Totally. He didn't have to do that, but of course he did. Another great thing that he taught was when the force equations that we were trying to model a real system with, when the force equations were too difficult from the very beginning, he said, follow the energy. Use conservation of energy to get a handle on the modeling of the system. I also need to recognize someone else here from Mudd who's not often mentioned, and that's Dr. Warren E. Wilson, our first chairman of the engineering department. He was a bit of a snob and a strong conservative, and he didn't have a lot of friends around here, but he mentored me. He gave me a job. During the summers, he taught me how to math model real systems in his consulting business. I also have to recognize my dad. He only had an 8th grade education, but he was the best practical engineer I ever ran across. Innovation is about thinking out of the box, and my dad was never confined by any box. Let's see, I'm not sure why the slide's not moving. Can I have some help? I just want to get to this one. There we go. And what moves it to the next?
These arrows. I think it's because this is more.
Oh, because that was on the pad. Okay, got it. Thinking out of the box comes from the little child's game of a 3x3 matrix having 9 dots. And you want to cover all 9 dots with straight lines. And you can only use 4 lines without raising the pencil off of the paper. And the box is obviously defined by those 3 dots. I found in my years of designing stuff, various kinds of stuff, that there are 2 conflicting principles. Number one, you have to know your subject exceedingly well to be able to design something new. You need to know all the needs, whatever you're designing, so that you can satisfy the functions necessary to establish the goals of the new design. You must know all the history of how the technology that you're working with got to where it is now. But 2, you must also have an open mind that is not constrained by what the technology is, or In teaching the capstone design class to all the engineering graduates at the U of A, which I did for several years, I would stress these two concepts. And this is where thinking out of the box comes into play. You must understand the needs of the design in order to develop and meet the functions, but simultaneously you must not allow the constraints of the problem to limit the solution space. So back to the box of 3x3 matrix. How do you connect them? Well, you can try by putting a line around like these possibilities, but you can never get to the ninth dot. You can only connect 8, working inside of the box. The solution has to come about by looking outside of the box, by moving the first line outside. There's nothing in the formation of the problem that says you have to stay inside the box. You have to look outside of the box in order to solve. As soon as you do that, you go outside the box, you have a straight line that comes down over to here, up to here, and over to here. And 4 straight lines you can solve. You can get to outside of the box. However, an example that I like even better is to have 3 toothpicks or matchsticks that you put on a table or on a flat surface to make an equilateral triangle. Then you give the student 3 more matchsticks or toothpicks and say, now make as many more equilateral triangles as possible, as you possibly can. So now you have your equilateral triangle. You have 3 more. You can put 2 of them over here, gives you 1, and then you have 1 toothpick left over. But you can only make 1 more equilateral triangle as long as you are on the plane. Think outside of the box, get off of the plane, go into 3 dimensions, and you can make 3 more equilateral triangles. That's the kind of process that one needs to do in order to have true innovation. So what other ways can we promote innovation? Well, cross-pollination is very important. And that was one of the major things I took away from MUD, is knowing the fundamentals of lots of different subjects in order to be able to use a little bit of each type of subject in a totally novel way. Examples were working on catalytic converters for cars. You know, I was not a chemist. Catalysis is a chemical activity. But just by knowing heat transfer and fluid mechanics, was able to very quickly, when catalysis was important for automotive work in the middle 70s, in order to cut down on the pollution. The carbon monoxide coming out of cars at idle in the 70s before catalytic converters ran up to 7% at idle. That's a ridiculously high amount of carbon monoxide to be dumping into the atmosphere since it's such a toxic chemical. But by realizing that the 2 things, that the catalysis was a surface phenomenon, where you had to have the gas get to the surface, number 1, and number 2, the catalysis doesn't work until the catalyst, in this case it was platinum on an aluminous substrate, until it gets hot. So the little tiny channels the catalyst was put onto the surface of these alumina blocks that had very small, about a 2 millimeter size holes in them, and they would laminarize very quickly. The fluid flow would laminarize. Well, when it's laminar flow, there's very little transfer of the molecules to the surface, and the catalyst didn't work very well. So the concept was very simple. Just make a very short catalyst, before it could generate full laminar flow, you'd put a space. It would returbularize and then go into another one. So you put 2 or 3 or 4 of these in a row, and it not only worked at steady state operation, but it heated up much more quickly than it did with a long tube. So knowing the fundamentals of engineering in so many fields is what Harvey Mudd does right, and that's what I think we ought to continue to do right. Thank you very much.